Hi guys, Mr. Halp here, and this takes us all the way to lesson 2E, and our subject of conversation today is the concept of classical argument, with also a couple of little details about Rogerian argument, or Rogerian. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it, but that's neither here nor there. Let's dive right in if you don't mind. So one of the things we've been talking a lot about is in the past, we've been talking about what do we put in it. Well, we haven't really spent too much time discussing, well, how do we structure it? How do we organize it? And of course, it being in this case, any of our persuasive ideas and arguments and things of that sort. And that takes us to today, the classical argument structure. As you can see here from that first bullet point that we've got, 5-part argument structure used by classical rhetoricians. So this is sort of the basic, most elemental, essential, time-tested method of structuring your argument that we can possibly present to you. Now, one of the things that I've mentioned to you guys repeatedly before is, again, be flexible, okay? Remember that there is no one right way to do anything in rhetoric. And this classical argument might be awesome in a lot of situations, but also you're going to be rewarded in a lot of situations for deviating from this whole concept of classical argument. So just something to keep in mind as you're getting into all of this. Like I said, it'll give you the bones of structure as we continue to move forward. And if you'll please just forgive any of my insufficiency with Latin. I've never formally learned Latin in any fashion, so I'm going to be grasping at straws, really, as I'm trying to pronounce some of these terms that we've got going on here. So let's talk about classical argument. So as you can imagine, like I said, it's got 5 parts. We're going to take a look at those 5 parts, and that covers the most of what you need to know about this. So we start, of course, with part 1 of our conversation on classical argument, okay? So in this case, we always would start with the exordium, okay? So this introduces the reader to the subject under discussion, and that makes a lot of sense. If you think about, just any kind of essay that you started writing right here and right now, chances are you're going to have an introduction paragraph or 2 or 3 or whatever, okay? That's basically going to present, oh, this is the subject, this is the purpose. You might not, until this class started, have considered things such as ethos to establish credibility, but that's also where you want to start to put some elements into that as well. So it's the introduction, essentially, but you want to make sure it does those things. Now, we've got 2 little bullets that go along with that. Of course, you want to be piquing the reader's interest. Make us want to keep going. Remember, in a best-case scenario, you're trying to argue something to us that we don't already believe, and you're going to convince us. But in order to get to that point, we have to want to keep listening. We have to want to continue to be observant to what your ideas are and take them seriously enough to maybe change our whole way of life as a consequence of what you've just written for us. So if you're not taking any active steps to pique our interest, that's a problem, okay? You're probably going to lose us from the get-go. So you want to always make sure that you're doing something that's going to maybe be mildly entertaining or shocking and surprising, but nevertheless captures our interest, okay? Don't feel like this is something that needs to be 1 paragraph. It can be multiple. It also doesn't have to be multiple. Really, what I would just think about is I would think about the overall scope of whatever this assignment happens to be. If this is an assignment that's going to be over several pages, all right, it might be more than, it might be more than a paragraph or 2. If it's something that's only going to be a 2-minute presentation, oh, well, that's a different story. It might only be a paragraph in this case. So just something worth keeping in mind, all right? So that's exordium that we've got there, and that takes us then down to narratio, or narratio, I don't know. Don't ask me. Like I said, my Latin is weak. I can confirm that for you, all right? So narratio would be our part 2. This is the stuff that provides factual information and background material on the subject at hand or establishes why the subject is a problem that needs addressing. So as you can see, this narratio section is going to dip in a little bit into that exigence. It's going to say, okay, this is the context in which we find ourselves right now, and we need to make sure that we do this change. If we don't do this change, then, well, whatever doomsday prophecy is going to happen, okay? But of course, we also need to have the basic background, and you can see how those two things kind of go hand in hand. The fact that establishing the exigence and the background of the subject are intimately connected. Remember, if you're finding the right kairos, now has to be the right moment for you to present this information to us. And that means that we need to know why it is and how it is and so on and so forth. So one of the things you want to keep in mind about that is, of course, hey, your audience is going to have a certain level of foreknowledge. What do they know? What don't they know? Every audience is going to be a little bit different. Hopefully you know your audience well enough to say, well, I need to talk about this, that, and the other thing, but I'm sure they already have background information on that, so we can probably ignore that. And that's fine, okay? But there are others where you're going to say, whew, they're pretty much a blank slate. I need to start from scratch. I need to start from the beginning. And your narratio might, as a consequence of that, be a little bit longer, all right? Now, particularly as it is very factually oriented, this narratio should, of course, probably appeal largely to logos, because, you know, if being factual and therefore really embracing that whole reason and logic, logos is going to be a big deal. That doesn't mean, however, that we're neglecting pathos, okay? Sometimes that emotional response is precisely the thing that we need to motivate us to take the next step and change our behavior or our beliefs or our thoughts or our mood, whatever it may happen to be. So just something to keep in mind. Lean towards logos, but also don't ignore pathos at the same time, okay? So that takes us down to confirmatio. Usually the major part of the text, the confirmatio, develops the proof through evidence to support the writer's claims. So at long last, in this unit on argumentation, where we started with our second lesson getting into that whole concept of evidence, we can finally start to present evidence. But keep in mind, everything we've done thus far has been building up to make this evidence more palatable for our listener, for our reader. So yes, sure, we might be halfway through and only now getting to the evidence, but we've sort of primed the audience to accept it more willingly and understand why it's so gosh darn important. So now we start to delve into all of those arguments, all of those details that you've been wanting to share with people. Not necessarily background information, but other evidence that you can use to supply the audience with reasons to believe what you're trying to convince them of, okay? This is where it's going to contain the most specific and concrete details in the entirety of the text, whatever that text may happen to be. So you're going to be specific and concrete as much as possible. If you're trying to argue for a change in policy of some sort, then you're going to say, well, we would do this, that, and the other thing, and we would do this, that, and the other thing because it would have this advantageous outcome and that advantageous outcome and that advantageous outcome. So concrete and specific, and obviously logos is going to be a big factor in that as well. Okay, so keep in mind, we dipped into pathos in part 2. Ethos was very much a component of part 1. But we're really in part 3 saying logos. It's all about logos at this point in time, okay? And if we've established the good pathos and ethos thus far, then the logos is going to naturally be accepted by our audience, okay? Part 4 is one that sort of piggybacks off of what we talked about in the recent past, refutatio, okay? Addressing the counter arguments. Okay, this is a bridge between the writer's proof and the conclusion, as it says. So you've already given us all of the best reasons to believe what you're trying to argue for us. Now it's time to say, okay, but before you believe me completely and totally, let's take a step back for a moment and look at what my opponents have to say. Okay, and if you're doing it, and you're doing it right, and you're doing it well, it's not going to weaken your argument. It's going to prevent you from being vulnerable to your opposition's attacks. That's what the ultimate goal is, okay? If opposing views are well known or valued by the audience, a writer will address them before presenting his confirmatio. So if you've got, I don't want to say hostile audience or something along those lines, but if you know that you've got an audience that is very much aware of and contrary to the angle that you're taking, you might want to start with this, as it says, and sort of do the classical argument a little bit out of order, and that's perfectly okay, all right? Again, this is probably going to have largely logos as the basis of what you're talking about. Again, we're using reason and we're using logic to show why the opposition is not accurate in their perspective on things, okay? But don't worry, we get back to pathos and ethos now that we come to the conclusion. Peroratio. Peroratio. So again, yes, this would be something akin to a conclusion, okay? So we've worked through all four of our previous steps to come to this right now. Just like with our introduction back there at the beginning, it can be one or multiple paragraphs. As always, be flexible for one thing, but also ask yourself the question, well, how long is my overall text? How many paragraphs do I need to accomplish what the peroratio is supposed to be accomplishing? Like I said, we can get back into ethos and pathos one more time, okay? So you'll notice that the introduction and the conclusion aren't really times for logos. We save those for our body paragraphs in the middle. But it's our chance to really pull on people's emotions if they didn't believe in us before, to believe in this argument simply because of emotional reasons, but also to understand why we have that credibility that we need to be so gosh darn convincing, okay? Keep in mind, you should not merely be repeating earlier contents, okay? Not only should you not just be repeating your introduction, but especially because this is mostly pathos and ethos that you've got here, you're certainly not going to be repeating your body paragraphs because those were primarily logos to begin with. So just something to keep in mind, all right? Since we, as people who are interested in the advantageous and are future focused, are considering what's going to be done in that future, a great way to conclude a good peroratio is connect all of the ideas and answer the question, so what? What happens now? What's the point? Where do we go from here? What do we do with this information? Sort of make it that future-centric, future-focused kind of argument that you've got going on. And it should be the most memorable passage of the text, okay? If there's ever a chance for you to be poetic, this might be it. Certainly you would hope that the logos and the evidence that you've already used has a tendency to be memorable, yes. But if you have to choose one place to really pour your heart and soul into it, it's going to be that peroratio, that conclusion, because if we remember it here, then we'll remember it after here possibly as well. And that means that it's more convincing and more effective at accomplishing its end goal, okay? So that's the classical argument structure as far as rhetoricians are concerned. And like I said at the beginning, just remember, this is great. This is a great structure, great way to think about all of this business. Be flexible with everything, but also don't ignore the sort of time-tested, tried-and-true methodologies that have helped rhetoricians in the past. So don't feel like you need to be burdened down by this, but also don't neglect it at the same time, okay? Now, Rogerian argument, really, we don't get too much into depth with this in this particular course. It's just more of, I would say, as far as this class is concerned, really more about food for thought than it is necessarily a specific structure that we're looking for. But it's one that I think offers a lot of value to your approach to a lot of different arguments. So we have this little introductory statement on Rogerian argument here. It says, named for psychologist Carl Rogers, who stressed the importance of replacing confrontational argument tactics with ones that promote negotiation, compromise, and cooperation. And those are the big deals of this particular style of argument. So notice he wants to replace confrontational argument. So most of the arguments you see in political discourse and so forth, well, Rogers would be a little ticked off about those kinds of things, I'm willing to bet, because they have a tendency to be highly confrontational. He says, no. Well, let's try to negotiate. Let's try to compromise. Let's try to cooperate with each other. I don't want to prove you wrong, and I don't want you to prove me wrong. I want to see where we can find some middle ground that helps us all work together to solve the problem in a way that we're both mutually satisfied with. And that's Rogerian argument, okay? So it's designed to be particularly useful for matters of personal belief. So when, obviously I think we're talking about, in this case, some more demonstrative argument in this case. But that's neither here nor there, and certainly you're not bound to only use it with arguments that are demonstrative in any fashion, okay? It's based on the assumption that having a full understanding of an opposing position is essential to responding to it persuasively and refuting it in a way that is accommodating rather than alienating. So let's pull that sentence apart a little bit if we can. So like it says, first off, yeah, you should always know your opposition's arguments, even if you're not doing Rogerian argument in any fashion. Yeah, that's true. However, he wants you to know it so that you can find compromise better, okay? And that's why it says essential to responding to it persuasively and refuting in a way that is accommodating rather than alienating. So again, to sort of use as the basis of our topic and discourse here, American politics, when an American politician refutes someone from the opposing party, it's generally in a very alienating kind of way. Rogers says, no, 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 let's try to accommodate one another. You don't like this because of this reason. I like this because of this reason. Well, let's see if we can find that middle ground. And as a consequence of that, I need to know everything that my opposition thinks and feels and believes and argues, so that not I can just make them feel bad and make them look like idiots on stage, so that I can help us both to find a happier, better middle ground. Okay, so again, that's kind of what I just said. The key component is finding common ground on which the speaker and his opposition can both stand. So that's that. What's really important about this kind of argumentation is you need to demonstrate that you have everyone's interests in mind. And that's a really unique perspective to have, because under normal circumstances, it oftentimes is just, as far as rhetoric is concerned, it's just supposed to be that I have you, the audience, and your best interests in mind. And really, I don't even have my best interests in mind, and I certainly don't have my opponent's best interests in mind. So that's normal rhetoric. Well, Rogers says, no, 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 no. In good argumentation, where we're really trying to solve the problem, I want everyone's best interests. I want to have everyone's best interests in mind. And yeah, of course that includes the audience, but yeah, sure, it does me as well. And more importantly, and most unlikely, it includes my opponent. And that's something that's really very unique to this whole concept of Rogerian argument, okay? So, to sum up that whole concept there, the goal is to reach compromise rather than victory, because both speaker and opposition have gained ground. And if you think about that, how foreign of a concept does that seem to be in the midst of any debate, any argument, any situation in which you've got two very polar opposite sides sort of fighting against each other? The fact that there could be that concept of compromise and that both have reached have gained ground in the process. Very unlikely, very unusual, but also pretty awesome. And hopefully it's something that you can sort of experiment with and have the opportunity to try your hand at whenever you get in arguments and debates. So that's Rogerian argument right there. Classical argument, like I said, big thing. It's certainly something you want to have in the back of your mind as you get into writing more and more and more and fabricating arguments of various sorts. But as always with all things, whether it's classical argument or Rogerian argument, be flexible. Remember, there are rules because the rules oftentimes indicate how things work best, and sometimes you're rewarded for breaking the rules. And that's going to be just as true on the AP Lang test as with anything else. Okay? So if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to come to me the next time I see you in class. And I will see you guys shortly.